Good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you might be joining us from. Welcome to Sidewalk Talk, an online platform that has real talk about the streets to gain insight, clarify misconceptions, and get a call to action from frontline workers in Newark, New Jersey. Sidewalk Talk takes a look to gain insight by having nuanced conversations and unpacking truths that are not often discussed. Clarify misconceptions about groups of people who are often unheard or misunderstood based on assumptions about their lives, and lift up the work of local organizations and get a call to action from those who know best, those in the trenches doing the work on the ground. If I can first, please give me some thumbs up or some hearts or some likes. Let us know that the sound is okay, that you can hear me. While you do that, feel free to check out Seeds and Berries YouTube channel where you can watch the first two seasons of Sidewalk Talk, and you can also watch this episode as well. While Sidewalk Talk was created by Alia Berry 20 episodes ago, back in 2020, seems like a lifetime ago, during quarantine. Tonight, or this morning rather, depending again where you are, we have a special edition, an episode, as I am your host. My name is Mark Comesañas. I serve as the executive director of My Brother's Keeper here in Newark, New Jersey. It is an initiative of the Newark Opportunity Youth Network, and I have the pleasure of being your host this morning. I also am the newly minted, one of several community stakeholders, who's the newly minted board member of the Village Revival Project, which we're going to get all into today. That's the goal. That's what we want to jump into. I'm really excited to introduce our guest, who's going to be kind of on the other side of the mic for the first time. But before I do, just some quick housekeeping. Please make sure that you like, tag, share this now. Don't wait. Do it now so folks can jump in and hear it real time. Feel free to comment in the comment section and join the conversation. We want to make sure that we hear from you. We hear what's resonating, what's striking a chord as the conversation continues. We have an hour. We're going to try to pack a lot in, but it is with my greatest of pleasures sitting on this side of the microphone to introduce a friend, a sister in this work. She is a very, very well-known community-based social worker in Newark, New Jersey, with 23 years of working with ages from 0 to 75, everything from daycares to homes, to group homes, to correctional facilities. She is the principal consultant of Seeds and Berries. She provides capacity building and training both locally and nationally with multiple organizations. That work, through her work, she's able to offer direct clinical supports in schools and nonprofits and within the government sector. She specifically has a specialty in frontline worker wellness, this idea of making sure that we are healing the healers. And that's been a call on her heart and work that she's been doing. And now she is the newly minted founding executive director of a new nonprofit organization called the Village Revival Project. And so I'm going to ask that you welcome with me the executive director, Alia Berry. We could do a drum roll, please, because this is a big deal. What's up, sis? How you doing?
Hello, Mark. Hello. Look, you're a host. That was a very good. You did that, Mr. New Host. Look, we
I
got
got,
lots of sidewalk talks for you to take over, host.
I got a
I
future.
see you.
I got a future. I got a future in
You
this.
definitely got a future in sidewalk talk hosting. That I see you. I see you.
Oh man. So listen, I appreciate you trusting me. to be on this side of this conversation. I take it with a great honor to be able to talk to you about this new endeavor and what is ahead in this work for you. Our topic today is this idea of reviving the collective heartbeat through empathy. I'm going to say that again, reviving the collective heartbeat through empathy. And it sounds pretty, there's a lot of verbiage in there. It sounds pretty warm and fuzzy. It sounds like, wait, what is it? And so that's what I want to get to. I want to be able to talk about, like, so what does that mean? What does that look like? I started talking about your 20 plus years of work as a community social worker and just supporting community. And so I want to start a little bit with what those early years look like, right? And so what were some of the learnings in the early years of your work? What were you learning about the work? And maybe even more important, what were you learning about people?
Hmm. So it definitely has been a journey, and while I was thinking about this, just across the way of the journey. So sometimes when I say 23 years, many people are like, "What?" Right? Like 23 years? How old is she? Right? So for the record, 39 years old, family. But
Mm,
still, 23 years was when I was 17 years old. And
mm,
so I was spending the summer in Philadelphia in 2001. And so I volunteered for an organization called the Village of Arts and Humanities, which was
mm,
a theater summer camp. I mean, they're a whole organization, but I was volunteering for the summer camp, and they did film, they did photography, they did theater. And so when I thought about this, I said, wow, that's full circle, right? That's full circle. Like 23 years ago, as a 17-year-old, I was being exposed, to what would then manifest later. So
yeah.
I found that like art at that time, I was seeing that art can express what words cannot say. And art can
Mm,
express pain, art can express joy. So, like, where we started in this career was about art, and was, in a special, diamond in the rough in North Philly. So,
yeah.
that's kind of where it all started.
Got it.
So,
Got it.
yeah, go ahead.
That's no, I mean, whew, there's so many places to go just with that, right?
Yeah.
And like those learning there. Take
Hmm.
us through a little bit around what were you learning the impact
Yeah.
of the arts having in your work and really on people. I'm really interested on this idea of the arts as a vehicle for transformation of people.
Yeah. So at that time, when I was actually in charge, not in charge because I was still a volunteer, but I was supporting a group of like 7-year-olds. And
Mm,
so they were like 6 or 7 years old, and I also have a background in theater, so like I had been engaging in theater since I was 10 years old. So that's how I even ended up by 17 looking into theater programs. So I also had expressed through art myself, right? And
right.
so even on my own healing journey, learning how I was able to express myself through theater, it made sense that I would end up in this place. But as I came to know those 6 and 7-year-olds, right? And as they began to dance and make music, and, I don't remember if they were doing photography and film, but
Mhm,
they were expressing the things that they were seeing. And 6 and 7-year-olds is a whole different conversation, right? They
mhm,
6 and 7-year-olds is a whole nother conversation, because what that inspired for me from that point is then I then did after school programs through my
mhm.
entire college career. So when we talk about
Got
23 years, well, how old is she? 17. And then I worked through my college career at after school programs and 13 years of summer camp. Summer camp is hard work. So that 13 years is a badge, right? Like as a counselor and as a director. And so I learned a lot about leadership through those
Yep.
experiences. After school programs were ages 3 to 17, right? And so like
Yep.
learn when you say learning about the people, right? How 3-year-olds become 16-year-olds. I was seeing that whole kind of lifespan and learning and understanding, even to very young kids. So in regards to how I was learning about the people, I think in
Yeah.
that period of my life, I was learning the lifespan. And I was also learning leadership early on because I was an 19-year-old camp director. And parents were
Got it.
like, who's this kid who's supervising staff and in charge of this camp? Right. But like I
Yeah.
started early. And so I was becoming a teacher. So I was
Got
going
it.
to school to be a teacher. And I
Yeah.
went to Temple University. I graduated, became a teacher. But while teaching, I was in a shelter, the Covenant House, for 8 years on the weekends.
Mm.
So although I was teaching Monday through Friday in
Yeah.
academic spaces, which I was probably,
Yeah.
I was still, what I come to find out is I was a social worker the whole time. Right? I was a social worker in the classroom. And some of my
Yeah.
colleagues watching this like may agree. I was a social worker the whole time. But I was in the Covenant House on the weekends. And
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
whole 8 years. And so I started to learn
Mm-hmm.
about the fact that there were so many roots, like emotional roots within
Sure.
young people. I mean, the Covenant House is 18 to 21, right? I then ended up at a behavior school here in Newark, Berliner, which was later
Yeah.
closed. But, my young people in Berliner, behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
Behavior in that kind of setting was happening because of what you have going on in your life.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
really started to see the roots under behavior. And I
Mm-hmm.
started to become of the opinion that, like, although academics is important, I respect education, I respect teachers, I respect the academic institution. But for me, page 12 in the textbook
Mm-hmm.
was not as of much of a priority for me
Got it.
by the time I got to that point. Because I'd much
Yeah.
rather target the root that you need healed.
Mm.
So I started to learn that. And then I was in a closing school 2 years in a row here in Newark, New
Two,
Jersey.
2 years in a row.
I was
Not
at
one.
Burnett Street School first. And then I was at Berliner. And I was the only teacher in the entire district in a closing school 2 years in a row. And so, but that last year, um, I had a student from Burnett. His name was Raheem. And so we graduated him from 8th grade, and he was killed the following January. And
Mm.
so Raheem shifted everything in me. It became much more urgent.
Mm-hmm.
The page 12 became way less important. My
Yeah.
life nor their lives are promised.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been procrastinating. And there were times that I felt like if I would have been his social worker, not to say, I'm necessarily in charge of life and death. I am not.
Right.
But in a closing school, and Raheem, passed away that year, I left the
Yeah.
district with nothing lined up and transitioned into full time social work and got my master's in social work. So I think that the lesson, what I was learning as we went, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I want to thank you. It's important in this work to bring the names of the people we've been impacted by, and so bringing Raheem's name I think is important into the conversation. And we're going to talk later on. I want to talk about this idea of how violence impacts not just the person in the moment, right, but reverberates in a community. And so I want to talk about that some more, but before we get there, I think the right thing to do is to talk about. So now we're here, right? It's early November 2023. We got this baby being born called the Village Revival Project, and you've kind of laid a little bit of the foundation of like your trajectory to this point. But talk about VRP. Talk about what is the genesis of VRP, right? Like, where did this idea come from? Because you've had many experiences, but talk about Village Revival Project specifically.
hmm So then, as I transitioned into full time social work, as a teacher and as a social worker, then in group homes, shelters, went back to schools as a school social worker in
Mm-hmm.
OYN, right, where we met, alternative ed. And so working with opportunity youth, I was also an activist through this entire period, right? And so we were shutting down back in the day, right? We were shutting down the streets where violence
Yeah.
occurred. Violence as a public health issue was being discussed here in Newark, New Jersey 15 years ago, right? Probably even longer than that. But like we were talking about that back then, which is invest resources into the areas that need it the most based on data and based on where violence is occurring. That being
Yep.
said, as I moved into activism, I was already in social work. I then began also working in a correctional facility. My
Okay.
internship in the master's and then the next 8 years to date has been
Hmm.
in a correctional facility. And so I started to I started to see that, like, when it comes to peace in the
Yeah.
streets, if we
Yeah.
are not talking to, loving on, understanding the ones who are causing the harm,
Yeah.
then we will keep taking these streets. And like
Hmm.
victim work is important. Spoiler alert. The ones
Hmm.
who have caused harm have been victims as well. But, at that point, it was really like I kind of came to a side that was like, I'm going to handle, this side of violence and
Yeah.
support this side of violence. Um, and so that it was a part of the genesis of the Violence Survival Project, because as I came to that side, I started learning and seeing and understanding the roots. I
Yeah.
would also say that I then lost several other people to homicide over the years, and when I looked at each death, there were different things that I gleaned from it, from the
Yeah.
circumstance. And I say that
Yeah.
to say because, for me to dedicate a piece of my work to those people who I loved and who passed is how I
Hmm.
uphold their legacy, right? It's not a just passing by like, oh, no, like and Miss Berry is still certified, so I don't necessarily put details in public, but I learned to go for the big homies.
Hmm.
Because if we go
Hmm.
here and we heal the big homies, things will trickle down, right? I learned about Heal the Healers, with Najee Seabrooks, who I can
Yep.
speak that name.
Yep.
Other ones, the roots, getting to the roots of violence through those deaths
Yep.
became a part of the genesis. Then one day, I was at a public safety roundtable here in the city of Newark, and we were talking about who to call to clean up. And I decided whether to say this in public or not. So,
Mhm.
warning, trigger alert, right? But we have to keep it real, right? They were talking about how to clean up brain matter on the
Mm.
sidewalk.
Yeah.
And I was so disturbed as a social worker who was doing this work, right?
Yeah.
Goal setting on a sidewalk. Like I was doing really community based at that point.
Mhm.
I was so disturbed as a social worker, but also as a community member.
Yeah.
And so I brought that conversation to a group that night that I was running, a therapeutic group that I was facilitating with individuals who have caused harm and
Yeah.
may have left such things on the sidewalk themselves.
Good. Yeah.
And so my tone, because I had already formed a relationship and a rapport with them, right? It
Mhm.
wasn't coming in a judgmental way, it wasn't like that. They knew I was coming in love, but it was a
Mhm.
hey y'all, we don't like that.
Yeah.
we and I
Yeah.
tell them that often. We don't like that, right? Your
Yeah.
lifestyle is traumatizing us. Imagine all the people that had to walk by that,
Yeah.
right? And kids and people on their way to work and crossing guards, right? And
And
so,
my
yeah,
my assumption is that they don't get an opportunity to hear from community in that way often, do they?
right. No,
Right? If you decide to give them the community's voice at that moment, there's a question: is when else would they have gotten it, right? And
yeah,
so, and just to let you know, Lee, I think the microphone might be rubbing on your shirt when you
okay.
move. It's a
Thank you.
little, so just
Thank you.
but please continue because that
Yeah,
that had to be a powerful moment. That had to be a powerful moment for them to
yeah,
hear from community at that time.
yeah. Because, like you said, they don't necessarily, although let's be very clear, they are community members, right?
Yeah.
They're not from other communities and come in here to, right? They're our brothers, uncles, cousins, boyfriends, right? And so they are our community members. But to what extent do they understand how their actions affect their surrounding community and their fellow community members? No, I have found, and this is not a monolith, right? Like,
Yeah.
this population is not a monolith, the community is not a monolith, but I have found in my experience that oftentimes they do lack insight. They lack
Right.
insight. They don't necessarily understand how their lifestyles are affecting their surrounding communities. So in that case, and they admitted that night, like, we never thought about what was left behind.
See, that's it. I was gonna ask. What I was gonna ask, what kind of reaction did you get? So it's
Yeah.
something they hadn't thought about.
Initially, because
Yeah.
the violence itself was justified, which is what we're working on, right? Now I'm doing the healing work on this side, right? I am actively doing the healing
They
work.
thought
What?
they thought it was
Correct.
right. Like,
They feel correct.
yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I hear.
That they
I hear that.
feel like the violence was justified, which again, we have to heal on the healing side with them,
Mhm.
100%. But they did not consider what was left behind in that incident, and
Yeah.
therefore how that affected the rest of the community that had nothing to do with the issue at hand.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
so it's about connecting this. So where that conversation then went was, oh wow, we never realized that. Dang, that's terrible. They
Hmm.
immediately showed up with empathy. It wasn't they were like, flippant.
Yeah.
They immediately showed up with empathy. However, the conversation shifted to the first time they saw that on the sidewalk
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
they were
That's it.
6 years old.
Yeah. It's funny you not funny's not the right word. It's interesting because we talk about this idea of empathy, and what you're talking about is how the conversation was able to maybe resurface the empathy that they had figured out how to hide, right? Or dig somewhere. It was there. It just had not surfaced. And so the
Mm-hmm.
conversation alone created a bubbling up of something that was deeply seated and maybe buried because of the trauma that they were dealing with. And so this idea, like, people are born empathetic. No, it's a skill that people learn. And so it sounds like that's the work you've been doing and are looking to be doing here when thinking about how to restore or revive, to use that language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Community. Is that fair?
Yeah, now yes. And also sometimes people, folks will say, well, empathy, that's a soft, people can interpret that as a soft word. Like, we're letting them
Yeah.
out of, but the way you just framed it is exactly on point, because the empathy though came through accountability.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until I showed up with relationship.
Yeah.
Right? I showed up with relationship, and I showed up to hold them accountable.
Yeah.
We don't like this. Right?
Yeah.
And so for them to be held accountable, I'm pro accountability.
Yeah.
I am pro accountability. It's about holding them accountable. But then the empathy now comes onto our side, because this us
Mm-hmm.
versus them dynamic starts to come into play. The community then needs to find empathy, because once that man saw that on the sidewalk, right, at
Mm-hmm.
6 years old, he began to feel powerless,
Mm-hmm.
and he began to feel scared that he was going to die the same way. And he just then made decisions, right, that in an effort to not be him, the one on the sidewalk.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need to understand how that goes.
Tie, this tie. I mean, just off rip, you're giving me so much to think about between the tie of empathy and accountability, and those two things don't get talked about oftentimes, even in the same sentences, right, or
Mm.
paragraphs. But this idea that true empathy brings with it an idea of accountability, I think talks about why the conversation around empathy is so important. And you started to talk about this a little bit, right? Like the community stakeholders and where people sit, but I want to talk about the intentionality of some of the language that you have used and are using, particularly with the Village Revival Project. And I'm interested for a little bit to talk about this idea of the village, right?
Mhm.
That's an intentional word that you
Mhm.
use. You could have called it anything else, right? But you decided to call it the village. And so just talk to me about like what is true about the village, what is not true about the village, and why use the word village, right? Like not the hood revival project or the urban communities revival. Like why the language the village?
Mhm. So one is how I've started to define village in the healing work that VRP is going to be doing. It
Mm-hmm.
falls within home is the first village that anyone started in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so whatever that environment looked like was that person's first village, right?
Yeah.
Then the individual goes to school, and school is also a village. And as we know, both these spaces may or may not be healthy. And so, but going to school is a village. And these are individuals, it's an ecosystem, right?
Yep.
Not necessarily public safety ecosystem, but it's an ecosystem that is around an individual.
Yeah.
But also, then the third village that is around a person is, we can define community in lots of ways. I'm beginning to just more drill down and call it neighborhood, right?
Got it.
And so like people can, define neighborhood differently, but essentially the neighborhood that folks feel around them is their village as well. So home, school, neighborhood would be their village, is how
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of defining it. When you ask
Okay.
about like what is true about the village, we
Yeah.
are so interconnected. We are so interconnected. Um, like I said earlier, the ones who cause harm are a part of our village. They're, family members and colleagues, yes, co-workers, right? Depending on where you work. I'm just saying, people, right?
Yes.
And so, yeah, and so like they are a part of the community. We are very interconnected. And I also tell those who cause harm how interconnected we are. So like
Mm-hmm.
for example, you are celebrating, I'm trying to put this in professional terms, right? You
Sure.
are celebrating the increase in finances
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that night
Yeah.
behind a situation that was harmful to the community. I hope everyone is, going with me. And
Yeah.
so the peer group is celebrating the finances. But come to find out, those finances that your friend got
Yeah.
actually was involving an incident with your grandmother.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I say that in different words, 100%,
Yeah.
but that's kind of mind blowing for them. It's like, yeah, that's how interconnected we are. So when your grandmother says she was carjacked last night, right?
Yes.
The person who did that could be your friend. He didn't
Yes.
know that was your grandmother, and you
Yeah.
didn't know it was your friend who did it. That's how interconnected we are. But I do believe about the village is that we are resilient.
Mm-hmm.
We can be unified when we need to be. I've seen it, right? We've
Yep.
already gone through so much, but especially this community here in Newark, New Jersey, like we are so resilient, so powerful,
Mm-hmm.
so dynamic and rich and
Yeah.
active, and right, like we are, that is like our flavor. But we do have the capacity to love.
Yeah.
We do have the capacity to love, and I've seen that too. And love unconditionally, we have the capacity for it. Now, whether
Yeah.
we're actually doing it, we'll get into the revival piece of this word conversation that we're having. But I don't think it's that we don't care.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't given up on violence. Oh, we
Yeah.
can't do anything, and I think that we also don't harm each other on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're not harming
No.
each other on purpose. But the fact is that, so a proverb that guides our work, is a child. It's an ancient African proverb that says, many people may have heard it. It says, a child not embraced by their
Hmm.
village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Right. And
Yeah.
we like go into detail. That is a very, very, a lot of our work, our curriculum is driven by that proverb. And so we're already talking about that, how the child is not embraced by home, school, neighborhood,
Hmm.
what the burn looks like, what they're trying to
Right.
get from the burn, which is the warmth.
Yeah.
We kind of break that all down in other spaces, but the village is a reference to ancient history and where folks have originated from. And so as Black and brown people, like our villages and tribes is in our DNA. It's in our
Yeah.
DNA, so we don't have to learn how to be a village. We have to
Hmm.
lean in to
Hmm.
being a village, but it's not a new concept that is, against our nature or
That's
opposite of our
interesting.
nature.
The idea of community and interconnectedness, it sounds like what you're saying is natural to the human experience, and particularly the experience of people of color, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just this idea of your tribe, your village, the interconnectedness of all of us, the relationships, community, similar to empathy. Like it exists. It's just a matter of figuring out how to build the conditions for that to bubble up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just it's really interesting. We've talked about this idea of the bubbling up, right? Is what I've been calling it. It feels like that might be what, and I want to stick on this idea of language articulation, right? Because language is important. And I want to talk about this word revival, right? So it's the Village Revival Project. And so, can you talk about the word revival? Like, what does revival mean to you? Maybe even more important, what does that look like? And how do you spark? I'm a PK, right? So I know what my pastor would say. I know what my father would say. I know, but like, what does revival mean to you? What does it look like? How do you spark revival in a village?
Yes. So I would, I got to the revival word after, and I haven't necessarily said this, but it's true. Is I got to the revival word after a senior citizen was shot and killed here in Newark a couple years ago, and outside, like on her porch, and it was
Mhm.
like so many shots that were fired. It was very disturbing to me, and so it became clear to me, and so much violence that occurs, right? Like a lot of different. I could say many stories that disturbed my heart. But
Yeah,
it's like when you hear some of the violence that occurs, it became clear to my heart that
yeah,
we are not breathing as one. We're like, it's impossible. Like, how could we be breathing as one when we're gunning down elderly women on their
yeah,
porch? Like, how can a community be breathing as one if this kind of violence is occurring? We're clearly not breathing as one. Our pulse and our heartbeat is not unified.
hmm,
And
hmm,
so, even to take it a step further, it's fractured, it's limping. I mean, I can use all the metaphors,
yeah,
but we are not as one. And so, to me, revival, like you said, a spark, but and it's something that is igniting something to change its form,
mm,
and in this case, the condition. Because the Village Revival Project is a transformative justice program. It is not a restorative justice program. Restorative justice is when those who cause harm restore, make amends, and restore to those who have been harmed, right? Transformative justice is when we change the conditions where harm took place. And to
mm,
me, revival is changing the form of the condition. And how we're doing that at the Village Revival Project is bringing these two groups together to have
hmm,
this dialogue together through
yeah,
art, because
yeah,
sometimes we can't say what we need to say, and art can a lot of times speak our piece. But that is kind of like a paddle, right? Like the EMS, how they do the paddle
yeah,
to revive our collective heartbeat, the heartbeat as one. Because I do believe that once our heartbeat is beating together, I believe we're unstoppable. We're unstoppable.
Yeah. So let's stay here for a second. I am a participant in VRP. I'm someone who says, sign me up. I want to come to the table. Talk, like, what does that look like? If what from the different experiences, right? Whether I'm on one side or the other side, what am I doing? What am I going to be pushed to think about? Yeah, just walk me through that. Walk me through a day in the life of someone who is being loved, is being held accountable, and is being encouraged to be empathetic. Like, just real. Like, I just want to be able to, like, close my eyes and see it. What would I see happening?
Mm-hmm. So I'll start with the frame that the activities are in. So it will explain each activity. The
Okay.
frame that it's in is a concept that I learned from your fearless leader, who was once my fearless leader, Robert Clark from Newark Opportunity Youth Network, taught me many years ago. Validate, educate, challenge.
Yes.
Validate, educate, challenge. It is first important to validate a person's experience, even if you don't agree with it. Based on what I said earlier, if they felt the violence was justified, I, as a healer, could have a conversation, and I've heard some wild things that I didn't
Yeah.
necessarily agree with, but I had to validate where they're coming from. Because you then move on to educate, which is giving them information. And you can't give someone information if you don't know where they're coming from, if you don't know their perspective. And then you challenge, which is where the
Yeah.
accountability shows up. But you can't hold someone accountable if you don't know where they're coming from. So,
Yeah.
and because everything will shut down, people will feel judged and be silent, and no work will get done if you do that in the opposite order. Okay.
Sure.
So, validate, educate, challenge. I say that to say that first, a participant who signs up for the program, the first phase is independent reflection, where they
Okay.
learn about trauma, and that's a little bit of educate. But through that
Mhm.
experience, their trauma history is validated. I
Got
didn't
it.
even know that was trauma, which is
Yeah.
what happens a lot because folks
Yeah.
normalize these things. They
Yeah.
normalize these things, and again, the people. Well, I'll say that in the second phase. So they learn about their trauma, both profiles, as we call it. The surrounding
Okay.
community learns about trauma, and
Yeah.
those who have caused harm learn about trauma separately. And we
Got it.
validate the experiences in those spaces as well as provide education. The
Yeah.
second phase, these two groups come together to
Hmm.
have dialogue, and to really be able to share with each other, because I've been the middleman for
Yeah.
over 20 years, and so I'm trying to remove myself as middleman, bring these folks together in a safe space. Right? Shame dies when stories are told in safe spaces. Not my quote, but very real. Very
Say
real.
that.
And I
Say it
said,
again.
yes, yes,
Say it
Mark.
again.
He said, what? Shame
Say it again.
dies when stories are told in safe spaces.
Mm.
Like, folks need to tell their story in a
Yeah.
safe space, not a judgmental or emotionally dangerous space, but in a safe space. Folks need to tell their story, because what has ended up happening is that those who have caused harm, and somebody may ask, well, if they've been traumatized, how don't they understand the impact? That's a great
Mm.
question. That's a great
Yeah.
question. And the fact is that they have normalized violence
Mm.
because they've
Hmm.
been, growing up in it in communities that are plagued with violence. And two, the defense mechanism shows up in a way that dehumanizes
Got it.
those who they harm. And
Understood.
again, as somebody who serves that population, that is what I have found. That Miss Berry, I didn't even hurt her. I just took her car.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, we didn't see her
There's a
face. We didn't understand.
differentiation. Yep.
We have
Yep.
dehumanized. We have dehumanized. But when you bring them together and you hear, no, you absolutely did hurt me in this way, this way, this way. I had panic attacks at a red light for years
Yeah.
to come. Now it humanizes the harm. But
Yes.
for both sides, because the
Yeah.
way she felt about the person maybe that took her car, she may not have realized that that was about power because he was being sexually assaulted in the home.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
so I say that to say that and then the last phase is they
Mm-hmm.
present their art to the community at large in a
Mm,
public demonstration.
mm,
And so at that point, they're able to show what it is they're doing. They show their transformative collaborative work, and the community at large can then transform themselves through their public demonstration. They also receive therapy through the whole program experience, both
okay.
sides. And they also receive case management through the entire experience. We don't want
Mm,
anyone in the program who is coming to the program during the day and sleeping on a park bench at night. That is
yeah.
not okay with Miss Berry. It never has been. And so I'm
Yeah.
going to make sure that folks are thriving in their personal lives as well. So they will also do case management. And then they can graduate into a leader and run this program in other settings in the future when we scale.
Yeah. I mean, it is obvious the intentionality with which you've designed the phases of the program. And I, I want to just call out your conversation earlier about ecosystems and the interrelatedness of those pieces of the ecosystem. The conversation around case management is a recognition that there are multiple pieces of your life, right, that contribute to who you are and what you bring with you. And so it's not about just what happens here and in this session, but it's also around how do we make sure we're supporting you as a whole person, right, a
Yeah.
whole human being, which
Yeah.
is really interesting. You do, however, raise something that some would argue is controversial.
Mm-hmm.
And the controversy is that in some ways, what you're saying is everyone deserves empathy, even those who have inflicted harm through violence in their communities deserve empathy. Is that what you're saying? And if so, because I think it is, why? Convince me why someone who would be considered violent, someone who's inflicted harm, someone who has hurt people or person or people and communities, does that person really deserve empathy? And if so, why?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate that because yes, we yes.
Yes,
Um,
they do. And why?
well,
Go ahead.
yes, and also yes to the controversial nature of the mission, right?
Yeah.
I completely understand. That it is controversial. I also do work in another city with mothers who have lost their children and the pain that
Mm,
those women feel. I mean, the mothers, and there are mothers across the country. I've met mothers in other cities across the country
mm-hmm.
who are doing the healing work and activism work. And so there are mothers across the country that I have met and supported here somewhat locally. Um, the way that their soul has
Mm-hmm.
been stolen from them.
Yeah.
They have such a special place in my heart, and I want everything good for them. I'm protective of them. Like, I love the mothers that I work with, I love them down. And so,
Yeah.
the pain, I definitely 100%, and this is the middleman piece,
Yeah.
because, yeah, I've supported victims of violence as well. And again, spoiler alert, those who have caused harm have been victims of violence themselves, which
Mm,
behaviorally manifests. And what I mean by that is fear, grief, shame, self esteem, power, broken hearts
mm-hmm.
manifest into violence. And that is like my message, and that is what I plan to teach.
Yeah.
Not only community, but those who have caused harm, because they're not aware how their trauma even behaviorally manifested. But I say that to say that I've been on both sides. And like I said earlier, I've lost people myself by homicide. And
Yeah.
so I just want to frame the word empathy and do they deserve it? And I love, because the way, and we're on the same page because, you're on
Yes,
our esteemed board, right? But like
you do.
the RLS comments,
Yep.
and for maybe non-local people, so essentially for non-local people, we have a media outlet here in North Jersey. They cover many cities, and so they will report on violence, and the comment section is unforgiving, for lack of a better word.
Yep.
And so, do they deserve empathy? The word empathy doesn't necessarily mean accept.
Mm.
And I think sometimes people go to that the same way I was in that group talking about what I was, the brain matter on the sidewalk. I was holding them accountable, but with love.
Yeah.
Like, I was holding them accountable with love. We don't like that. Your
Mhm.
lifestyle is hurting us. We don't want to hear gunshots at night.
Yeah.
We don't want to be scared to stop at a red light. We don't
Yeah.
want to be worried about our kids getting shot, on in front of dismissal time because, street politics said it was the right time at
Mm.
dismissal. We won't get into that. But like, we don't like that. And so I think that, but also, can I understand where you're coming from? That's where the empathy is. And
Mhm.
and also then, and we don't just leave it there, we hold you accountable for healing.
Mm.
I hold them accountable on a regular basis. Y'all got to get healed.
Yeah.
And this is how. And then I lead them through healing work. That's what I do. But I'm holding them accountable for healing. But I'm empathetic, which means I
Mhm.
understand where you're coming from. That does not mean I have to accept it. That does not mean I have to, let them continue. Just
Yeah.
because I'm empathetic or understand where you're coming from, I have to validate, educate, challenge. Um,
Yeah.
and so, if that is in our best interest when it comes to violence, if
Mhm.
empathy can cure violence, which I believe it can,
Mm.
then like, why not? What is there to
Yeah.
lose? Not to mention, those who are causing harm are in our homes.
Yeah.
Can we not have empathy for our own, boyfriend
Mm.
or cousin or son? It's not like these are strangers. And I've said that several times throughout this. Can we have
Yes.
empathy for our own family members?
Yeah.
I believe we
Yeah.
can. And
Yeah.
so, but I also just want to say that the empathy is not one way. I'm not only talking about empathize with those who cause harm,
Mhm.
they need to empathize with community as well. They
Yeah.
need to empathize with community as well. You all need to hear the community's truth, the surrounding community's truth. You are community members as well, but you need to have empathy for the community as well. So it is not one-sided, and maybe that will bring the controversy will bring the controversy down a little bit, because we're
Yeah.
not only talking about one-way empathy, we are talking about mutual empathy. Does that bring it down a little bit? We'll see, Mark.
No, I mean, so right, like I'm showing my hand, right, because I'm on here and I believe in this work and I believe in the mission, right, of the Village Revival Project, and so I'm sold. I'm sold. I've been sold from the beginning, but I do think that what you highlighted was that the empathy is a human experience that requires you to reconcile with the impacts of what you've done,
Mm,
which brings a different level of accountability than sheer punishment, it sounds like. And so,
mm,
and you've worked with, you know, folks who are incarcerated. That's There's an argument to be made that that experience is an experience of punishment, right? It doesn't sound like what you're trying to do is bring further punishment. It sounds like you're trying to bring, you've used the word multiple times, healing, right? And so you're forcing me, and I'm assuming you're forcing folks who are hearing this conversation to think about the differences between punishment and healing.
mm,
And I'm curious, as you hear that framing and just in your
mm.
experience, like how do you think about the differences between punishment and healing? Yeah, I'd be interested to hear from you. How do you see the differences there? Because let's be clear, if I am a victim of violence, I want revenge, right? I want punishment. Um, I may not even, I want restitution. I'm not sure I'm thinking about, I want healing, even if that's really what I probably do want and need. And so I'm just curious, in your experience as a, as a social worker, range of years of age groups working with, like, can you talk about that, like punishment versus healing, and like just how are you squaring that circle?
Hmm. So one, and I've learned this from those who do survivor work for
Hmm.
decades and across the country. Who was actually I'll plug this. E. Rubin was a former Sidewalk Talk guest. And so if
Got
you
it.
go to the YouTube channel, you will hear somewhat where I learned this, right? And I'm just gonna kind of like put it out there in my own words, but definitely go check out that episode. It's an amazing episode.
Hmm.
But the fact is that even if we're talking about those who have been harmed, and
Hmm.
again, both sides have been harmed, but let's just, for the sake of argument, the surrounding community who has been harmed, they are not a monolith either.
Mm.
And so sometimes we treat survivors like a monolith and we never ask them how they want healing.
Yeah.
Because it's not always revenge. And it's true. There are some who do want revenge and restitution and punishment, but there
Hmm.
are a host of survivors and a survivor community who says, I wish court would ask me what I want to do.
Mm.
I wish the judge would ask me what I want from this situation.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the criminal justice system, even for the survivor, the prosecutor side of the courtroom,
Sure.
sometimes when we ask them, what do you want, including the mothers that I work with, like not all of them are a monolith. Some of them
Yeah.
have different opinions about what they view as healing for themselves, and it's not
Hmm.
always through punishment.
Yeah.
So I would say that those who are looking for restitution and revenge and punishment probably won't even walk through the VRP doors
Mm.
because that's not what we're doing. But there are a host of other people who want to heal in a different way. And like, who's offering them that?
Yeah.
Who's offering them this other way of healing from the harm that they endured?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know if this version of healing is really being offered.
Hmm.
And so I think, yeah, the punishment versus healing, um, it depends who wants what. And I don't know if we often like vocalize that or build infrastructure to accommodate that. So here we
No, that
are. And I
no
would
that
also say that when it comes to the healing and punishment, those who have caused harm have also been punished because they've been rejected from community, which is how we got this us versus them dynamic.
hmm
And the us versus them dynamic only pushes me away further and pushes me into a subculture, which is often my peer group.
hmm
And then this peer group is, their behavior, has their trauma has behaviorally manifested together.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, where I feel like street groups come from. So we're rejected as a whole from community. Who loves me? The community
Mm.
doesn't love. I literally have heard that. The community doesn't
Yeah.
love me. They cross the street when I'm coming. So why am
Yeah.
I supposed to care about the community when they don't care about me?
So I'm gonna burn it down.
And I'm going to get
Yeah.
power from it. I'm going to address my fear. I'm going to cope, right?
Yeah.
When my friend is killed and retaliation is how I want to address that. That's the anger stage of grief. And a healer like me is working to interrupt that. Again, I'm over on the other side doing the work as well. Because even your retaliation, the whole other rest of the neighborhood in the place where you retaliate, was then traumatized by your
Yeah.
retaliation. So the VRP still comes into play, but that rejection from community is punishment.
Yeah.
And it only exasperates the problem. Because if you don't like me and you cross the street when I'm coming, and
Mm-hmm.
you don't humanize me, then I'm going to dehumanize you in an effort
Mm-hmm.
to protect my heart. And we're here we're here at ground zero. So I would
Yeah.
also say that rejection is punishment as well when it comes to punishment versus healing.
No, I mean, we can go on. We can go on. I
Mm-hmm.
know we're running out of time. Folks have been tuned in. There's so much stuff just to digest and make sense of. let's start to close out with this. How can we support this work, this
Mm.
necessary work in
Yes.
our community? How can we stay plugged into the work as it is growing and impacting our community?
hmm So, in order to remain plugged into the work, I would say at this point, I would definitely check out the website, which is
Mm-hmm.
www.thevillagerevivalproject.com, which will be on the next screen.
Sure.
And also follow the social media. So, we are the Village Revival Project on Facebook, the Village Revival Project, one word, on Instagram. And so, I would definitely say follow the social media as we get going. But how
Mm-hmm.
to support the work? I mean, through the website, you can, of course, donate. And there's ways, to donate through the website. So that's a tangible way to be able to invest in this work. We are a startup, and so we're looking for investment in various ways, diversifying it, of course. But if you would like to donate, we would welcome that. And that goes to staffing, art supplies, space, venues, materials, things like that. But then how to support this work in the community. Because we haven't gotten to programming yet, which we plan to in the winter of 2024, how we can support this work is to be open minded to these ideas. Like the ideas that have been discussed today, to try to be open to these ideas and bring the idea out into your community, even if
Mm-hmm.
programming hasn't started yet, just by sharing this episode. Again, not for popularity. We're not trying to share Sidewalk Talk for popularity. That is not the goal here at all. But to share this episode is reviving the community in itself, because it's planting seeds, essentially of mental discord. It's like
Yeah.
hey, we've been looking at this like this. We may want to look at it like that.
Yeah.
And so to share the episode or to share these concepts with your neighbor, with
Yeah.
your parents, with your child, with your family members, with your colleagues, regardless of where you work. You don't even have to be doing community work. But this shows up in every aspect of life, every space of our community. And so I would say for now to share this idea and share this concept, because it is not black and white. It is very,
Mm-hmm.
very nuanced. It is very gray. I would also say validate, educate, and challenge those around you.
Yeah.
That validate, educate, challenge can be for spouses. It can be for children. I'm trying to put you
Mm-hmm.
on to the Robert Clarkism that, super changed my life, right? Like
Yeah.
validating people first before we educate them and before we challenge them is real relationship building. Like things go better when you do it in that order. And I would say also the last thing is, and this is another shameless plug just because I'm thinking about it, Solomon Middleton Williams, Deputy Director of Newark Community Street Team, was also a former Sidewalk Talk guest. And we had a conversation about public safety and putting the public back into public safety, here in Newark, where we are leading the way nationally in community-based public safety work and community intervention. And it was so sad. I still remember the moment in the interview where he was like, bottom line, talk to your neighbor. Talk to your neighbor. That is public safety.
Yeah.
And what I'm talking about today, I feel like I have further, hopefully, convinced you that just talking to your neighbor, whether he is at the bus stop on his way to work or whether he is selling drugs,
Yeah. Yeah.
and in front of the corner store, and we can't even get through them to get into the corner store, with something brought up in another community meeting, which is valid. But speaking and talking and saying good morning to our neighbor, and then step further, asking folks their name. What do they want to be when they grow up? Do they want to go to trade school? Well, 990 pays for trade school, as an example, right? But like going a step further and showing interest in their lives. Can you do that today on November 4th, 2023? Yes. Yes, you can talk to your neighbor. You can show interest in him. You can humanize, this individual. You can humanize this individual, which is a violence reduction strategy, is kind of what I'm landing on. So that's
Yeah.
how I feel like you can support the work for now. And then when programming begins, come to a performance. come to a
Sure.
performance when we then launch the program. And the phase 3 is the performance. So when we are at Symphony Hall in the Black Box, come to a performance, buy a ticket, and see their work, and you'll be transformed through their collaborative work.
Yeah. No. Thank you, sis. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you for entrusting me to have this conversation and
Yes.
for allowing me and all of us who are watching this this calling come into fruition. And so thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
So,
you. And you were an excellent host, Mark. You held it down. You held it down. You were an
uh,
excellent host.
no,
Thank
no,
you.
it was my pleasure. It was my pleasure. I'm going to close us out. I want to close
All
us
right.
out with
Have all right.
some wrap up. We'll talk, sis. I want to close us out, wrap up some ideas, but I'll start here. I am currently sitting in a hotel room in Chicago because I am part of the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, and the invitation was extended to our city because of the work that has happened around public safety. And I start there because you've heard in this session a little bit about all the people and organizations, and there are many more who weren't mentioned that make up this ecosystem, whether that's Robert Clark and the Opportunity Youth Network, right? Solomon Middleton Williams and the North Community Street Team. And there are others. E. Rubin was also mentioned, right? There are many folks who make up this public safety ecosystem. And what we're talking about as a community, as a city, is we've had and made tremendous progress. But what does the next phase of this work look like? And I think that this Village Revival project is one of the important pieces of the next phase of the work. Alia has been a part of that ecosystem for years. You heard she was a part of it within the school system, within the streets. I mean, her resume is long, and her reputation definitely precedes her. And so, this Village Revival project is taking the conversation to the next level, which is talking about this idea of empathy as a vehicle of accountability. I mean, the times that she interwove words like empathy and accountability and love in the conversation, I think was really intentional. It's at the heart of the work of what I understand the VRP to be. She talked about this idea of the village and the ecosystem and how we are all interconnected. We have to heal everyone. If anyone is sick, then there's an argument to be made that we are all at risk of being sick as well. But the idea of healing everyone, extending empathy to everyone, was just really palpable. And this idea of eliminating language like us and them, like that came up over and over again also. Like there is no us and them. It sounds like the important pronoun here is we and us. And so I am excited about what the future holds, not just for our city, but specifically with the Village Revival Project. I think it's going to be one of multiple things that allows the city to move into the next phase of this work, and continue to launch us, and specifically Aaliyah, and just the phenomenal work she has been doing for years in our city to the next level. Um, there are plenty of places where you can find this work and us. And so you'll see the website and the social media handles and all that good stuff at the bottom of the screen. We ask you to please just tap in, follow, tag this video, share it in to your friends and family, and let's start this conversation around empathy and as a vehicle of accountability. I mean, that's what I'm gonna be chewing on and letting marinate, I know, for some time. And so there's no reason for me to do that by myself. We should have our entire community think about this tie between the two. So like, tag, share. Thank you. Love you all. And with that, I am complete.